Thank you. Okay, so everybody, welcome to our session on advocacy for housing and houselessness. I know you all know what JServe is, but just to give a little recap, since 2005, JServe has provided teens with a unique opportunity to band together through a service as a united global network committed to fulfilling the Jewish values of Gimilut Chasadim, Tzedakah, and Tikkun Olam, our responsibility to repair the world. Every year, Jewish teens worldwide join each other on this special day and throughout the spring to make their community and the world a better place. And this year, nothing's canceled, it's just online. So today, we are so honored to be joined by Adinah Miller, Andrea Shapiro, and Rachel Libros. And I'm going to give a little background on all of our guests today. So Adinah Miller is the program director of Tivnu, the Jewish Social Justice Gap Year Program in Portland, Oregon. And as a part of that job, Adinah facilitates discussions, tours, and workshops that explore all kinds of social justice issues, including houselessness, racial justice, and environmental justice through Jewish and local perspectives. And Andrea is a lifelong Brooklynite who is passionate about building strong and stable communities. Andrea has previously worked at Hunger Free America as a field organizer and lobby day coordinator for a political consulting firm, and with the domestic workers' rights movement as a part of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. And finally, Rachel is the program director of teen and family programs for Repair the World in Pittsburgh, where she coordinates meaningful volunteer opportunities for teens and young families to support their communities. So thank you all for joining us. And without further ado, go ahead and do your thing.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Gabe. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We have a presentation that we'll have up. Good. Can everybody see that? Is that?
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so today we're going to be covering a lot in a short amount of time, so bear with us. Hopefully there will be some time for questions. But we want to start by doing some basic defining of terms so we know that we are all talking about the same thing through this conversation. We're going to think about what the daily experience of folks who are experienced houselessness or being unhoused is like and what some of those needs are. Also thinking about what that means in this current time that we're in now and what is happening out in the world, what efforts are already in the works to keep people in their homes who are really in some financial difficulty now. We'll also be providing a bit of a Jewish context in thinking about housing issues, and then a call to action at the end. What are we going to do with this information we're talking about today? So with that, the first activity we're going to do is requires a little bit of action on your end right now. So I don't know if any of you have used this feature before, but if you scroll up to the top of your screen with your mouse, a little black bar should pop up that looks like this, and you'll click on the Annotate button. And then this second bar that you see on the page here will pop up, and you're going to click Text. Good to move on? Does everyone have that happening? Yes, no, maybe so. All right, I'm gonna move on. If you have questions or if it's not working for you, that's okay. But I'm gonna pull this next screen up and hopefully you have that text ready to go. And I'm curious just to see, when you hear the word homeless, what comes to mind for you? What are word associations you have with that? What does that word mean to you? And if you have clicked that text option and you click onto the screen, you should be able to type in a response there. If anyone's struggling with it, give a wave or something and I can talk you through it again.
I think participants might not be able to have that feature, so I think that we can just type in the chat.
Just type in the chat, yeah, go for it. That sounds perfect. I'm seeing struggle, hard to get out of, unfortunate circumstances, feeling out of place, powerless, can happen to anyone. Great. Stigmatized. Amazing. Feel free to continue to add any words that are popping into your head. I'm going to pass it over to Adinah now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the language that we're going to be using today and why that is.
Great. So sometimes folks who are experiencing homelessness choose other language, just like a lot of us choose different language for how we're referred to in other circumstances. And one thing that we've noticed in our work out here in Portland, Oregon, is a lot of people prefer the term houseless to homeless. And, you know, I'd love to spend time kind of talking about the implications, but since we have a lot to get through, I'll just kind of put some basics out there. I think the idea generally is that they might not have a house, but they do have a home. Their home might be a tent. Their home might be a shelter. Their home might be a feeling of community. It might be that they have a family somewhere that feels like home, but they don't live there in that situation. Also, sometimes they prefer terms like people experiencing homelessness because it's just a temporary thing and it's not necessarily who they are. It's not necessarily their whole identity. It's rather just something they're experiencing right now. And you'll also see terms like unhoused or unsheltered. Again, kind of putting the emphasis on this being a situation they're in, a circumstance, rather than a whole identity. And if you're interested in more about that, here are a few resources, and we'll try to send those to you later. I think we're going to move on to talking a little bit about the daily experiences of people experiencing houselessness. And before we start this short video, I want to tell you about Outside the Frame. As it says here, it's an organization here in Portland, Oregon that was founded to teach filmmaking skills to young houseless people who then have those skills so they can get jobs and also have the skills to tell their own stories and have their voices heard through those skills, through those films. While you're watching just the first minute and a half or so of this film, I want you to think a little bit about the kinds of needs or resources that unhoused people have and that are difficult for them to reach, to get a hold of. And you can either put that in the chat now or when we finish. So we're going to just watch a little over a minute and a half.
Well, if you've never been homeless, I could see you not understanding or being able to put yourself in her shoes. I moved out here because I had nowhere else to go. And it's hard to get a foot up when you ain't got nothing. A lot of people out here don't have nowhere to go or nowhere to turn to as well. Or it makes it real hard when it rains, especially because what do you do when everything gets wet and you ain't got nowhere dry to go? You stay wet. Water's a huge thing out here too. Finding somewhere that you can get water at that isn't going to call the cops on you. But a safe place to put our trash, like that we all knew was a place to put our trash, it would help out a lot.
If you bag it up and try to throw it in somebody else's dumpsters, a lot of times they'll come out and yell at you, and there's just really not a lot of places to put it.
They treat homeless like they aren't people, like they have no rights. It'd be nice if we close that gap and get individualized again, you know. If not everybody's criminal and not everybody likes living garbage. The people, I don't like being called homeless because Portland's my home, but it's pretty bad right now.
All right, we're going to stop there. If folks wanted to put in the chat ideas they have about either from this video or just from your knowledge about what kinds of needs are not always being met by folks who are living outside, go back a slide before we pull up that one. Thank you. Anyone have anything they want to put in the chat? The obvious one is a shelter. You talked about needing a place out of the rain, which is a big thing here in Portland, probably less a thing where you are, Gabe, in Arizona. All right, medical, feminine hygiene products, access to health care, positivity, yeah. They talked about dignity and kind of humanity also. Unable to stay clean and find safe places to sleep, right? Safety and a safe place to sleep, especially when you're sleep deprived, all kinds of other needs kind of cascade from there. And staying clean, so a place to wash your hands, to go to the bathroom, shower, do your laundry. Any other thoughts? So I just kind of typed out a bunch of different ideas. Some of them came up in the film and many of them did not. Beyond food and water, we have health care, and some of those we mentioned, toilet, sinks, and showers we talked about. Supplies like clothes, whether that's warm or for warm weather or cold weather, depending where you are, or rain or snow. Blankets, tents, hygiene supplies, someone mentioned. Mail. How do you get your mail if you get Social Security benefits, or if you're applying for a job, or those kinds of things? Information about what's happening. We have a group here in Portland that sells a street newspaper, and when COVID-19 hit, they stopped selling street newspapers and started handing out information about COVID-19, because folks who are living unhoused don't always have access to that accurate information. Places to store things, child care, shelter, obviously, laundry, job training, and then those kind of intangible needs are at the bottom there: community, dignity, self-worth, support. So these are some of the ideas that come out in that short snippet of the video, and we're happy to send you the links to see other videos by folks from outside the frame. They're really powerful. Or to have you come out to visit us in Portland, and we'll introduce you to the filmmakers. What I want us to do is now we're going to go into a few little breakout groups. I guess we have 2 people in a group or something like that. And I'd like you to kind of just talk about reflecting on that list we just came up with of these needs and resources. Think about ways that those might change under COVID-19. So what is harder to reach resources now? And when you come back after, let's say, 3 minutes, then we can share those in the chat. So Rachel's going to put folks into a couple of smaller breakout groups. Although we're a pretty small group, we could even just share on screen. We could unmute everybody if we want. Should we just do that?
That would be a better use of time. So yeah.
Great. So what did folks think about what's harder with COVID-19? Harder to reach resources? And you can just go ahead and speak up.
Well, with all the social distancing and like the shelter in place orders, like a lot of volunteers are unable to get to places to help provide for them.
Yeah, definitely. So places like soup kitchens and day shelters and things. Great.
On like the housing aspect, you don't know like where the people have been, so they can like bring different, like, I don't want to say like bacterias and stuff, but you just don't know where they've been. So like providing housing for them, there's an extra caution there.
Right. You don't know what people have been exposed to, because you don't know who they've been hanging out with and what kinds of access they've had to hand washing, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Access to healthcare. In the United States, healthcare is pretty much tied to employment. And so if someone is houseless and they are not necessarily employed or employed at a place that provides healthcare, then and they get sick, then they will have a much more difficult time either getting healthcare or being able to afford it and be stuck with insane medical debt.
Yeah, terrific.
I also think that
Yeah.
as more and more businesses are closing due to the coronavirus, access to food and other things are increasingly difficult.
Yeah, folks who rely on soup kitchens and things like that, most of those places here in Portland, at least, have gone to-go systems where they stand at the door and hand you a to-go meal. But some places haven't even been able to do that, or did for a week or something, and now have had to shut down. They're having trouble getting access to the food supplies in order to make those meals also. Great. Anything else? Yeah, I think a lot of the places that we have here in Portland, like Join, which is kind of a day shelter, people can go there and get their mail. They can go there and get a shower. They can go there and do their laundry. They can go there and get clothes for a job interview, dog food for their dog. All kinds of things like that have had to close the doors, and maybe they serve people kind of remotely. But they really are not able to serve them inside anymore. And that means that people are becoming more and more vulnerable to the elements and to those possibilities of their lives falling apart even more. And as you said, I think it was Jill talking about access to healthcare. As more and more people need access to that healthcare, some of them aren't going to know where to turn or have the ability to turn to those places. All right, I think we should probably move on to the next part, which I'm going to turn it over to Andrea for that.
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Andrea from Met Council on Housing. We're New York's oldest tenant union. So just to start off, who is a renter? Why is this important for us to talk about right now? So across the country, 36% of Americans are renters, and every major city is majority renter. We have some other people who are renters. Who is a renter? Can you just type your name into the box or type that you're a renter or your family's renting? So in New York City, nearly 60% of residents are renters. We've got lots of people, some staff members. Often when we talk about America, we talk about home ownership. It's a really important thing. Owning things are really important to us, which is really why when we talk about renters and the tenants' rights movement, it's sort of something that sometimes cuts across the grain of what we're taught, that people who don't own their property have the same rights as everyone else. And it's important, especially right now, to remember that renters have these rights. And so, as we said, the majority of people in cities are renters. In New York City, 50% of renters spend more than 30% of their income on renting. That means that we're officially rent burdened. And more than 30% of people spend more than 50% of their income on rent. That means that without any other crisis going on, the majority of New Yorkers are cutting back on leisure activities, on food, on Metro cards, how we get around, on medicine. And there's this nice little link to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which can show you sort of the ratio of how many hours you'll need to work if you're working a minimum wage job. So how do you think renters have been affected by COVID-19? So people want to unmute themselves, let them know, let us know.
Yeah, I know of people who've been kicked out of their housing because for various reasons, but especially like if they're renting from like a smaller situation, not a huge apartment building. I have a few friends in Austin who just found out that they have to move because they don't want to deal with, the landlord doesn't want to deal with any of it right now.
People are being people are being fired and are becoming jobless, and so they may not have the money to be able to pay their rent And rent is due April 1st, which is very soon. And if people haven't been working, then they won't have the money to pay their rent. So I've been seeing a lot of like rent strikes that have been organized and stuff like that.
Yeah, so tenants have a big fear, right? In many places in the country, tenants really don't have any rights. They sort of have the time they're staying in their apartment, and many times they can be asked to leave within 30 days, if not less. Often there's very little recourse for them. In New York City, we have housing court. We have a very robust group of rent protections known as rent stabilization and rent control, which give most tenants in New York City, the majority of tenants have some sort of protection against being asked to leave immediately. We also have protections against illegal evictions. So that's when your landlord just changes your locks. Those are illegal in New York City and in many cities. But a lot of places don't have that. And especially as we're being asked to shelter in place, the question is, what happens if you can't shelter in place, right? Oh, can we go back to that slide? So that, which then leads to homelessness, right? The number one reason people are homeless is because they've been evicted, right? It's a very simple equation. And so in all of what's going on, tenants need to worry about sort of evictions. And if they are evicted or they need to move, can they move? Will movers show up? Will landlords just decide to increase the rent? We've seen reports of landlords increasing the rent 25, 50% because they know tenants want to stay in place. Then how do you get repairs? When you're renting, you don't get to repair your own apartment. You shouldn't. It's your landlord's property. And so if you need your repairs, somebody needs to come into the apartment. And if you don't want outsiders, if you're in quarantine or self-quarantining, you can't do that. You also can't have inspectors from the city or state come in to show that you need repairs, or even have your landlord come into your apartment is a big fear. And then there's also the fear of simply leaving your apartment for long periods of time. In New York, our regulations are tied to being permanent resident. And since we don't know how long this crisis is going to last, there's a lot of fear that if you go shelter in place somewhere else, you may lose the rights to your apartment. And then one of the things that wasn't mentioned before in homelessness is a lot of people are homeless but living in an apartment. They're overcrowded. They're staying on someone's couch. There's 2 or 3 families living together. And when you're that overcrowded and everyone's stuck at home, things can get bad very fast. And then your apartment simply can be dangerous. It needs repairs. It's needed repairs for a long time, especially in public housing. There's a lot of problems with mold. And we're stuck there. And so these are all the things that tenants have to worry about. And so New York State, as well as California and several other places, have one eviction moratorium. So that means we can't be evicted during this time for the life of the crisis. We can go to the next slide. But a rent moratorium is not enough. As was mentioned, a lot of people have lost jobs, lost hours. And even with an eviction moratorium, we'll still have to pay the rent. And so what we're now calling for is to cancel the rent, an automatic rent forgiveness. And why is this so important? Why can't we just say, we'll figure out all the people who lost income and they'll get the rent back? Or they're getting checks from the government, why can't we just do that? The reason why it's so important to us that when we think about rent forgiveness and canceling the rent, that it's automatic for everybody. And that's because a lot of people who lost their jobs are in the informal economy. There are people who watch kids in someone else's house. They're house cleaners. They're day laborers. They work off the books. And so they're not reporting their income to the federal government necessarily. That might be undocumented immigrants. They might not be able to prove their income. A lot of waitresses and waiters and baristas and all those folks who work on tips have often problems proving their income. And then the more times, anytime you have to fill out a form, there's a group of people who just aren't able to or won't fill out a form. You have to get the word out that that's something that needs to be done. And so we're very concerned that sort of the people who are most vulnerable and getting hit by the economic downturn are the people who actually can't fill out these forms or won't fill out these forms. And so we would need something large because we have a large scale problem. Anyone have any questions?
All right, I think what we're going to do is, thank you, Andrea, we're going to just kind of show you the Jewish text that we were going to go over, and we're not going to read it all now, but I just want to mention some of the themes. The first one is from the Mishnah, so this is around the year 200 that it was composed, and it's the same idea about kind of not evicting during times of trouble, but this was written 1,800 years ago. And the rabbis then, and then Maimonides in the Middle Ages, kind of talked about how, especially during the rainy season, or especially if you're in a city, in certain situations, you really can't be evicted because it's not a fair and just way of operating. So these things that Andrea told us are in process here in the United States right now. These are ideas that have been around for a long time. In the next text, which we're going to see in a second, it's from Sifra, which is about 50 to 150 years later. Just talking about not letting your neighbors, your fellow person, fall down all the way, because it's a lot easier to shore them up, to kind of help them up before they fall all the way than once they've already fallen all the way down. So we're going to end with Andrea telling us what we can do, even if we are in isolation of some kind or quarantine, and then we'll have time for maybe a question or two.
Thank you. So one of the big things is, since we're all in different places, you can follow Right to the City, which is a national translocal group, which means that you can get involved with different things in your area, as well as some overarching campaigns. You can call your governor and ask them to cancel the rent, end homelessness, and reclaim our homes. Also, feel free to post on social media, follow those hashtags, and learn what's happening in your state.
Great.
Awesome. So that is just about our time. So again, I just want to give a huge shout out to Andrea, Adinah, and Rachel for joining us today. And if you have any further questions, obviously you can contact them right here. But without, I guess I just want to say thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, and thanks to everyone for joining us. And like Gabe said, feel free to reach out to any of us if you have additional questions, since we didn't really have a chance to have too many questions in the presentation, but we're happy to answer them moving forward.
Thank you. I thought it was really interesting to like the different like ways we could help and what's happening with homelessness, because a lot of people like focusing on like food and like helping, and that's obviously very important, but I've learned a lot recently about like the statistics and stuff, and just global what's happening. So that was really interesting.
Great.
Thanks so much. Great night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you guys so
Take care.
much. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.